Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Big development on Yuki Tsunoda and his chances at Sergio Perez's Red Bull seat after last weekend's post-Abu Dhabi tyre test. It seems the Red Bull engineers were massively impressed by Tsunoda's performance, not just on track, but also his technical feedback offered as well. Helmut Marko says he is far better in this regard than many give him credit for, but will that be enough to give him the drive next season, especially when Christian Horner's opinion is not yet known on the matter? Red Bull do say, however, they are making this decision in the coming days. The shareholders are getting involved in what that decision is going to be. Has that decision already been made? Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Quickly on the driver market elsewhere. Alpine are suggesting that Franco Colapinto is not out of the realms of possibility to be signed just as of yet, with Flavio Briatore saying that, look, if Colapinto is an option for 2026, you have to think about it, he says. Now, this is interesting on a couple of levels. Firstly, because, well, he's an option now if you really want him, right? I mean, he's under contract now with Williams. He's going to be likely under contract next year with Williams as well. In an ideal world for Williams, I guess they loan him out somewhere for a little while and then get him back to their team when Sainz or Albon moves on. But even just when those two drivers, one of them does move on, Colapinto seems like a good option to step into the team. So I don't think he's any more available now than he will be for 2026. But definitely implies that Briatore is not convinced that Jack Doohan is going to be the man. And fair enough. I mean, look, Jack Doohan's only had one race. It's tough to say. But look, would I be paying millions of dollars to get Colapinto out of his contract to replace Doohan? No. I think you give Doohan the opportunity, see how he can do next year, and if he doesn't deliver, then maybe you go and get Colapinto elsewhere. So maybe Briatore is on the right lines here, but it doesn't mean that Franco is getting a seat on the grid next season. Max was interviewed in quite some detail over the last few days after his recent World Championship victory. He was actually asked about that Lando "it's just luck" comment. We saw some drama on it a couple of days ago when Lando kind of backtracked and said, all right, I didn't mean it in the way that it sounded. And look, Max has had his own drama with the media and quotations and whatever, and understandably after a race your thoughts are going to be in a certain place, especially when at that moment it was quite clear that his title chances for Lando were over after Max's performance in Interlagos. They immediately interviewed him after a race where he got a mental blow. I know Lando, at that moment, he's very disappointed himself, and he doesn't mean it at that moment. So I thought that was kind of nice. Obviously, we know the comments between Lando and Max earlier in the year. Things got very heated in Qatar between Russell and Verstappen, but in Austria, you remember when Lando was saying, oh, if he doesn't own up to the mistake, then I'll never respect him again and all that stuff. And I feel like that drama is only set to heighten over the next 12 months or so as we get into next year's championship battle. Max was also talking about the British press. You know that he was going wild on like, okay, I don't have a British passport, therefore I get treated unfairly. And there was, you know, debates on either side of this topic. But he was calling out here, it seems, some of the journalists by saying, you know what I like the most, I can say it now. Immediately, two people felt attacked by his comment on the British press, and they have to write about it on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. So I forget the other one. Will Buxton definitely talked about it. Here actually were the tweets that Will Buxton said about this cheeky post-race dig. And there were a few British journalists that came on and said, oh, that's unfair for Max because, you know, we weren't there for this reason, or there weren't any Dutch journalists there either. So, look, I get it. I think at the end of the day, often Max is just having a bit of fun, to be honest. But, yeah, tweet your thoughts on that in the comments below, because I know that Will Buxton was talking about it at the time, so seemingly that is one of the guys that Max is calling out right about here. Max also said this I thought was very Max Verstappen, and to be honest, I think it should be very Lando Norris, but it's not. You guys remember papaya rules? I hope we don't have to talk about it ever again, but it was introduced towards the end of the season when, yes, Lando was in a title fight in the drivers, but McLaren weren't so willing to really accept that reality. They wanted to win the constructors, and fair enough, they did win it, and maybe by keeping things more cordial in the camp, they helped out their case there. Certainly Hungary, for example, when Lando gave back the win, you know, in the grand scheme of things, that didn't affect the World Championship result in the drivers. Did it increase team chemistry and morale and, you know, culture between Lando and Piastri? Maybe. So, sure, I understand it. Of course, Piastri gave up the win in the Brazil sprint race, and then Lando gave it back in Qatar. So, you know, you could argue that's a good team dynamic that they've built over there. But fundamentally, if those two guys are both in a World Drivers' Championship battle next year, it's going to get feisty. And Mark Webber, as Piastri's manager, will want it to get feisty. He doesn't want to happen to Piastri what happened to Webber when he was back at Red Bull in the Vettel days. That's at least my perspective. But papaya rules was thrown around, and it effectively, no one really know what it meant. It seems to mean like just keep it clean between one another on track, rather than anything in terms of team dynamics, right? Because it was papaya rules this, and the thought was certainly in a race like Monza, they should have been clear to say, okay, if you guys are 1-2 out of the first corner, let's not do anything, silly that's going to affect the balance of the race. Piastri makes the incredible move around the outside of Norris into that chicane, but obviously that put Norris down to third, and Leclerc goes on to win the Grand Prix. That was a big blow. So Verstappen makes it quite clear. If he heard papaya rules on the radio, I'd tell my engineer to shut up immediately. So that's Verstappen's take on papaya rules, and I think that Lando's take honestly should be kind of similar. Look, I understand what McLaren are getting at there, but just to describe it in the way that they did, I thought it didn't strike me as something that a winning team would do. But look, they did win at the end of the day. They struggled over the line with the best car this season, but they did win the Constructors' Championship in the end. And speaking of the best car this season, that was not the RB20. It certainly was by miles at the start of the year, but then things changed rather dramatically. It became relatively clear obviously there's been various theories as to why the RB20 fell off a cliff, but whatever you believe, at the end of the season, it could still be fast in Max's hands on occasion, but pretty rarely so. And even when it was showing glimmers of promise, it then would quite swiftly fall out of the working window, and Red Bull woke up on race day every Sunday not really knowing what type of car they'd get. Qatar, let's not forget, they were terrible in the sprint race. He couldn't even get past Hulkenberg, right, in a Haas. I think it was Hulkenberg. Anyway, couldn't get past a Haas during the sprint race. And then in the main race, Max was fine. He wasn't like miles quicker than anybody else, but Max comfortably handled it. The car was handling much better, and Max won the Grand Prix. So Marko says the RB21, this car needs a wider work window so that it does not get out of balance in the event of slight temperature fluctuations or minor technical changes. So, yeah, bang on the money, I think, and Red Bull clearly are recognizing, okay, we don't need to be chasing peak downforce, we need to be chasing drivability. The McLaren was the most versatile car this year on multiple different circuit types. It still wasn't great everywhere, neither was the Ferrari, but down the stretch, both of those cars were more versatile than the RB20 was, and I'd say, frankly, that was the main differentiator. But let's talk about the tyre test in Abu Dhabi. So pretty much this time last week, this is when it was going down. Leclerc topped the times, then Carlos Sainz in second in a Williams. That was kind of interesting, and these were the other names that were testing on the weekend, or on the Monday after the weekend in Abu Dhabi concluded, and McLaren locked up the Constructors' title. Notably, of course, Yuki Tsunoda. He drove 127 laps in an RB20 that weekend. Lawson, I think, was in the RB. Now, in terms of best lap times, Tsunoda only a 1:24.6. Leclerc was, this is Arthur Leclerc, by the way, was a 10th faster. Lawson was another 10th faster than that. So the immediate reaction was, Yuki's maybe not impressed so much. But of course, peak lap time or best lap time is not maybe the entire thing Red Bull were looking for. They were looking for good long run pace and maybe feedback on the car, because it's testing with the new tyres. They want to know how the car's doing in those circumstances compared to the tyres that they're familiar with from the most recent year, and they want to compare and contrast some of that data. Now, Sergio Perez, it's tough to say whether he's going to stay or go. If I had to put money on it, I would say that Perez going is definitely the most likely possibility. But I still wouldn't say it was guaranteed by any means, because we've talked about this for the last couple of years now. Never bet on Perez leaving Red Bull is the reality, because it seems like his backers might come in and put the hammer down, as it seems they did during the summer break this year. This is what I think Eddie Jordan had to say. He says, I'm embarrassed for Checo. I like the guy, but are you telling me that he's angling and fighting for a place in the team next year? I'd say there's not a chance, but I put the blame on the team, and I put some blame on Max. I know that Max put pressure on Christian. He did not want Carlos Sainz in the car. Now, this is very interesting what you guys think about this in the comments below. He wanted Checo in the car because because he knew he could beat him. And to be fair, Max has to just think that a little bit. Christian has to think about that. They will deny it, but it's my belief that there was a situation where it was easier to keep Checo in the car rather than consider a position where it might be better, better fit basically for Sainz to get the Constructors' title next year. Now, this is interesting about, the idea that Max specifically didn't want Sainz in the car because he felt like Sainz was going to be more of a challenge. Now, I do doubt this a little bit just because I think Max Verstappen would back himself against anyone on the grid in the same car, certainly at Red Bull. I don't think Max would be scared about anyone, but I do think that next year, it's not as if Max feels like he's going to get beaten. I think the concern for Max would be that his teammate might take points off him, and in a close constructors battle as we've had this year, and therefore a close drivers battle, if you can beat your teammate every single week, every single time, that helps you a lot in the Drivers' Championship fight. So I don't think it's so much that he's concerned about, Sainz beating him. I think if this is true, which I do see the argument, Max wants to beat a teammate that he can, he wants to have a teammate he can beat 24 out of 24 races. And, Sainz would not be beaten 24 out of 24 races. He'd be beaten the majority of the time, I believe. But, not on that regularity of discussion. So, and it's a similar thing we've seen elsewhere. Even we saw, I think it was Jos Verstappen say that, oh, well, don't worry so much about Checo because if the car is better and more versatile, then Checo will be back. So it was almost Jos Verstappen was basically saying, oh yeah, we can keep Perez, make the car better, that's okay. So there is a feeling that the Verstappens kind of like Perez being around just because he isn't very good. And at the end of the day, the Verstappens, as in Max, he doesn't benefit from the Constructors' Championship numbers. Like, he doesn't benefit from the bonuses that the employees get. So you've got to factor that into consideration, right? The employees of the team, they want someone else than Perez, I'm sure, because if they place higher in the Constructors, they get more money. Whereas Max doesn't. In fact, he might get less money if his, teammate takes enough points off him that he's not going to win the championship. So just something to keep in mind. And Red Bull do have to balance all of these factors when it comes down to choosing his teammate for next year. It may still be Perez, but it does seem doubtful right now. Tsunoda was testing the RB20 not long ago. The 22 on the car looks kind of clean as far as I'm concerned. And Tsunoda says they mentioned Red Bull, how impressed they were with his performance. So look, let's have a look at some of the quotes, what Yuki said, what Red Bull had to say on the matter as well. I heard a lot about how impressed they were, particularly with my feedback. Now, this is pretty interesting just because it was a talking point at RB, Racing Bulls, whatever, AlphaTauri, that Daniel Ricciardo's technical feedback was stronger than Tsunoda's was, which it was maybe a weakness of Yuki's at the time. There was discussion that Yuki had been trying to learn as much as he could from Daniel in terms of how to give good feedback on the car and its driving characteristics that are going to help the engineers, and it seems Yuki has improved in this area to some degree. This impressive feedback, I guess, came not only just from the trackside engineers, but also from the engineers supporting remotely from Red Bull's factory in Milton Keynes. They mentioned how impressed they were with my input. So, compelling words here from Yuki Tsunoda, and even Helmut Marko, who we know is a bit of a Yuki fan, more so than Christian Horner is. But Marko says this: during the postseason test drives, Tsunoda was allowed on the track in the RB20, and the team was happy with his technical feedback. Which, and to be fair, happy for Marko is kind of a strong word with how this guy tends to speak. In this regard, he is far better than he is said to be. Now, pretty strong words there. Now, at the end of the day, they're not talking about his driving, right? I mean, maybe you could argue they know how good his driving is already from what he's done previously. They have had their concerns on Tsunoda as a Red Bull driver for whatever reason. The main theory goes it's mentality. Would he be able to cope going up against Max Verstappen? Would he be broken mentally, getting beaten week in, week out? I see the argument. Is Lawson going to be any better in that regard? Maybe marginally. I'm not convinced that it justifies putting Lawson in the car over Yuki when I do think Yuki right now is the stronger driver, but Lawson's been close enough, I guess, given his time frame in the sport. I understand where they're coming from, but I feel like if anyone's earned it, it's Yuki's. But look, that's just my opinion. You guys are free to disagree, but I know that many kind of share my perspective on that if you're ever going to put Yuki in the car, surely now is the chance to at least, give him a try. And then if, he's not so good after half a season, you can swap him around potentially between Red Bull and Racing Bulls. But if one of the reasons why Red Bull weren't so keen to consider him was because, they didn't think his technical feedback or his kind of like mind for the sport on some level was good enough, this may have changed their minds to some degree. And Red Bull are now saying, yeah, this decision either has been made or will be made in the coming days. Marko says negotiations are ongoing. There will be a decision and announcement coming this week. This is the first time shareholders are involved, he says. That's actually very interesting as well, isn't it? The idea that shareholders are getting involved in the matter. You've also got to wonder how much, Mexican sponsors or just some of Perez's sponsors in general are getting involved in this discussion. Of course, Honda will want to have their say as Tsunoda's primary backer, effectively, and the last year of their power unit partnership with Red Bull before they go exclusively to Aston Martin from 2026. So there are plenty of stakeholders and presumably plenty of shareholders as well that want to ensure that the B team is actually sensible in terms of what it's doing. And, well, they can argue that both ways, depending on who their driver replacement is going to be. And the rumour, of course, has it, Horner literally said it a couple of days ago, if we are going to replace Perez, it's either Yuki or it's Liam Lawson. And reportedly, Red Bull are going to announce this decision in the coming days, potentially just before Christmas. So, yeah, we're expecting a decision soon. I think the decision may already have been made, but there is some interesting developments again on Perez because his contract is making things a bit complicated because they'd have to get him out of his contract. Perez isn't just going to retire and walk away. Like, if he can get some money, he's going to do that. As I said the other day, if I was Perez and if I was Red Bull, I might offer a situation where you say, look, all right, Sergio, retire, make it clean, but therefore we'll give you this big ambassadorial role, whereas if you don't retire, and we have to pay you off, then you're not getting that, and you're going to be cut off from Red Bull, whatever. I don't know. I'm sure the lawyers are talking about it. But Helmut Marko says the number that has been associated with Perez's contract termination fee is nonsense. There is a lot of speculation and amounts are also mentioned for any transfers fees that are utter nonsense. The number that we heard was $20 million. That was the number doing the rounds, that Perez has demanded $20 million to terminate his contract for the next couple of years, and then, of course, he's going to be free to go. Now, I don't know exactly where those numbers are coming from, and Marko says they're not true, but there will be something involved, right? Like, if they've signed a contract for a couple of extra years with Sergio, and he is going to be fired, obviously there's going to be some sort of termination fee, you'd imagine, for that contract from the Red Bull side. What it is, questions, I guess we'll see. If we ever find out what the answer to that question is. And Tsunoda then talks about this in a bit more detail and says, my chances of getting to Red Bull Racing are 50-50. Of course, I'd be happiest if I could drive for Red Bull, but I'm incredibly grateful for the support. So, yeah, his perspective is that it's a 50-50 chance. It's either him or it's Lawson, or I guess it's Perez. I mean, like, what does he think? It's maybe Tsunoda believes himself to have, like, half a chance, and then the other, is it like 25% Lawson, 25% Perez? I don't know what you guys think in the comments section below, but that's where we presently are, and I think it's definitely interesting Red Bull's words on this because they give Yuki a lot of credit, saying how his technical feedback is far better than maybe they expected or that he gets credit for, which shows that Yuki impressed to at least some degree. Were they that impressed with his lap times? I mean, presumably also yes, given that he clearly wasn't pushing massively for a fastest lap, doing a lot of long run data that Red Bull were happy with for his feedback, it seems, as well. So there are some positive news here for Yuki Tsunoda today, but I would still say it is far from guaranteed who Max Verstappen's teammate is actually going to be for next year and beyond. So very much interested in your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.